Welcome to another supplemental, folks, and it seems like every other week there's some kind of news concerning Star Trek 4, meaning the fourth movie in presumably the Kelvin timeline, or rather just the next big screen outing for the Star Trek franchise. Now, we've heard the fourth one was supposed to bring back George Kirk, with Chris Hemsworth reprising the role from 2009, but then Pine and Hemsworth dropped out, then they were back again, then they were gone again, but Pine says he still wants to do it, then there was Quentin Tarantino, he's also apparently making some kind of Star Trek movie, but then Noah Hawley was doing some kind of soft reboot perhaps, and now Kalinda Vasquez, who has written for Star Trek Discovery, is said to be penning the script. So what the hell is going on? Why is there so much conflicting news about this? And just in general, why is the new Star Trek film taking so long? Now, in assessing all of this, we have to go back to Star Trek Beyond. Unfortunately, Star Trek Beyond wasn't a box office success, which is a shame because I liked it, and a lot of people liked it because it had an overall very positive critical reception and a positive audience reception. I've heard from many people who didn't like 2009 and Into Darkness actually liked Beyond. And so clearly someone liked it, but just not enough people saw it, unfortunately. And on a budget of $180 million, a rough budget of that's an approximation, the film only grossed $320 million worldwide. And that actually means it lost money, because when you factor in the marketing costs and the cut which cinema chains take from that gross, yeah, it's very likely that Star Trek Beyond unfortunately didn't just break even, it just lost money, which is a shame. But then again, Star Trek has been in this position before, with movies that have bombed, and then there's been another movie afterwards which manages to be a hit. This happened with Star Trek V, The Final Frontier, that was a bomb, and then Star Trek VI came out, and that was a hit. And with Star Trek Nemesis, that was also a bomb, but then 2009 came out, and that was a hit. And honestly, Star Trek Beyond is actually in a better position than those previous bombs, because Star Trek V and Star Trek Nemesis weren't met with a positive critical reception, and a lot of audiences and fans didn't much like those movies, and so Star Trek Beyond is actually in a better place. So there's reason to believe there is still some kind of audience for a Kelvin Star Trek movie, albeit a cheaper one. Obviously, Paramount, they're a little bit apprehensive about greenlighting another Star Trek movie which costs $150 to $180 million or something like that. So even if we do get another movie in the Kelvin timeline, it's likely Paramount is probably thinking about, cutting back a little bit in some places and having a cheaper movie which can make a bigger profit. And that's kind of the first hurdle that the fourth Kelvin timeline movie is running into, because with a cheaper movie, costs have to be cut, and the cast by this point is quite expensive. We have Chris Pine, who's been in Wonder Woman, which was a big hit, which means his agent can demand a bigger payday for him. Chris Hemsworth was in the MCU movies, and Endgame became the highest grossing movie of all time briefly, so his agency can also demand a much higher salary. And Zoe Saldana is not only also in the MCU movies, she's also got Avatar, the sequel to the highest grossing movie of all time, coming up as well. So all three of these cast members are suddenly very expensive. They can all demand very high salaries. And the other cast members as well, Zachary Quinto, Carl Urban, so on and so forth, they can also demand a little bit of a pay bump, because this is their fourth film. It's likely in these kinds of situations when people are signing up to a big franchise, they're usually contracted for about 3 movies. And those 3 movies are up. So if they want Carl Urban and John Cho and so on and so forth back in the next movie, then all those cast members are probably going to cost a bit more as well. And the need to cut costs is likely why Pine and Hemsworth dropped out, because the negotiations between Paramount and their agency probably didn't go well, and so that's why they dropped out. But Paramount may have run the numbers and found some extra room in the budget, which is why they were back on again or interested again and then dropped out again. Either way, it may be possible to figure out some kind of budget for a new movie while retaining the new cast, but ultimately it may just be too pricey for Paramount, which is why they're likely assessing other options. Which is why we ended up hearing things like the Quentin Tarantino Star Trek movie. You have to remember that when these Kelvin timeline movies started, they started in a kind of different era in Hollywood. They started back in the author-director-driven trilogies. This was stuff like Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings and Christopher Nolan's Dark Knight trilogy, and even to some extent Paramount's own Michael Bay Transformers trilogy. But these days, of course, all the rage is the cinematic universe. That's the big trend with the Marvel Cinematic Universe and the DC movies and even the Monsterverse with Godzilla. The cinematic universe is the big thing. So it's possible Paramount may be thinking, maybe we need to branch out a bit more. Rather than making another trilogy or just kind of a saga of films, maybe we need to get on this cinematic universe bandwagon. And honestly, Star Trek is a well-suited to that. The universe on TV was kind of an interconnected TV universe back in the 90s. So, yeah, it kind of makes sense to branch out the Star Trek universe and try to have a kind of cinematic universe with different spin-offs and so on and so forth. And hearing that Quentin Tarantino is a big Trekkie and has some ideas about his own Star Trek movie, yeah, it may seem like a pretty good move to go for him and say, hey, look, Tarantino's making a Star Trek movie now. But Tarantino is kind of a unique filmmaker in that a lot of the stuff he makes, he has pretty much 100% creative control over because they're all his original ideas. And Tarantino has said many times before he's going to make 10 movies and stop, and this Star Trek movie that he'd be working on, he probably wouldn't count as one of his 10, and he'd have to delegate a lot of stuff, and he'd have to kind of take notes from higher-ups, which is not really his thing, which is why the development of his movies moving quite slowly and not really generating a hell of a lot of news anymore. And to clarify, when a movie is in development, that doesn't actually mean it's been green-lit or it's in production. All in development really means is they're just kind of batting around ideas and saying, hey, we could do this and we could do this. And, at the most doing some concept art or a bit of costume testing or something like that. But ultimately, in development doesn't really mean much in terms of will the movie actually go forward. But in general, the hype kind of died down around this one, and it's kind of questionable if it's actually still happening. Meanwhile, if a Kelvin timeline movie is no longer an option, there was always the soft reboot option, which is what Noah Hawley's idea was apparently going to be. His idea for a Star Trek movie was to feature a new cast of characters played by fresh young faces and everything like that, and it's unclear whether that's going to be on the Enterprise or what era. There's not many details on his idea, naturally, but in general, his idea, he stated that it was to feature a new cast of characters. It wasn't going to be Kirk, Spock, and McCoy. It wasn't going to be Pine, Hemsworth, or Quinto, or whoever. It was going to be something new and fresh. And again, that makes sense. If Paramount thinks that the cast for the Kelvin Timeline movies is too expensive, it makes sense to try and start a bit fresh. But what happened with this idea? Well, it's possible this was kind of put on hold or quietly shoved away or, buried because of the Viacom-CBS merger. We have to remember that during all of this, during the development of getting a fourth Star Trek movie off the ground or a new Star Trek movie off the ground, Paramount's parent company, Viacom, and CBS, that used to be one entity, were now separate, are back together again. And in big corporate mergers like this, there's always some kind of personnel shuffle, and so it's very possible that the guy who gave Noah Hawley the thumbs up to get his Star Trek movie off the ground may not be there anymore, and the new boss may not be so keen on his idea. And so, in Hawley's own words, his idea was kind of abandoned, and basically Paramount just kind of stopped answering his calls, which is a shame. In Viacom CBS's eyes, the Star Trek which is currently succeeding right now are the TV shows like Discovery and Picard and so on, the Star Trek which is under Alex Kurtzman's helm. They're getting strong ratings on the platforms they've been getting on, they're getting regular audiences, they've had a strong critical reception, so clearly something's working, he's doing something right. So it makes sense that Paramount may want to, get some of that talent to try and develop their next Star Trek movie, which is what brings us to Kalinda Vasquez, the news that Kalinda Vasquez, who was a writer on Star Trek Discovery, is the one who's going to be penning this new Star Trek movie. And this is probably a completely different idea to, Star Trek 4, the fourth Kelvin Timeline movie. It's a completely different idea to Tarantino's Star Trek. Probably a completely different idea to Noah Hawley as well, and we don't really know much about this new idea, but all we know is it's in development. And I think ultimately that's kind of the problem, is that we don't really know what Paramount wants, and I don't know if Paramount themselves really know what they want out of a new Star Trek movie. Although the Kelvin Timeline movies may have a modest audience, it's not comparable to the big Marvel movies or anything like that. Although there may be an audience there, getting the cast back is proving to be a very tough task. Hawley's soft reboot idea seems to have just kind of stalled. Tarantino's cinematic universe expanding spin-off, whatever the hell that was going to be, again, we don't really know what's up with that. We haven't heard anything about that for quite a while. And all of this is pretty much why Star Trek 4 is just stuck in limbo right now. Unfortunately, no one really knows what the next step should be when it comes to Star Trek movies. Or should there be a Star Trek movie? Should it maybe just kind of stay off the big screen for a while and just remain a TV franchise where it seems to be succeeding. It's a tough position to be in, and personally, I'd love to see all of these options. All of these options sound appealing to me. You know, I enjoyed the Kelvin Timeline movies. I'd like to see a fourth one with that cast. Don't know if that's going to happen, though. A soft reboot with a new cast of characters, I'm also keen on that. Tarantino's Star Trek, if that ever happens, I'd absolutely be keen to see that. I'm just kind of fascinated by that idea. And, whatever Kalinda Vasquez is working on, in general, I'm just keen to see a new Star Trek movie. You know, I hope to see this franchise return to the big screen. It's, had a lot of success there before, and I'd love to see that success again. Regardless, I hope I'll be there to see it. But yeah, that's really the reason that Star Trek 4 is taking so long, is that Paramount's just very divided over what it actually wants, and it's kind of struggling to take away certain lessons from Star Trek Beyond's poor box office performance and saying, well, where do we go from here? And that's why there's a lot of just kind of contradictory news, and it seems like every other week someone new is working on Star Trek 4. But I don't doubt we'll see a Star Trek movie at some point again. This is just too lucrative a franchise to not try that again. And whenever that Star Trek movie appears on the big screen, I'll certainly be there to see it. Thank you for watching. If you like these videos, subscribe and hit the bell icon to stay up to date on my new uploads. If you want to help the channel grow, join my patrons or my YouTube members, where you can see videos early as well as some other exclusive content. Speaking of which, I'd like to quickly thank all of my patrons and members who are now appearing on screen. Have a good one, and as always, live long and prosper.